All right, we are live. Thank you for joining everyone to SQL Friday number 53 with Jean-Pierre Voogt. You will have to pronounce your last name for me because I cannot apparently. Jean-Pierre is connecting from South Africa, so same time zone as me. It's noon, I think at least. And Jean-Pierre is going to talk about data migration to Azure SQL database using Polybase. And we were starting to chat here before I kicked off the recording, and we are about to see some examples of something that Jean-Pierre did as a live migration. So I'm really looking forward to it. Polybase is cool. So thanks for coming to SQL Friday, Jean-Pierre. The stage is all yours.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. So you can call me JP. Surname is pronounced Voogt. It's I think it's Dutch or French, not really sure. Born and bred South African, so that's as far as it goes for me. Yeah, Voogt.
All right. Yeah. I think JP works for me. Yeah.
JP is the easiest. That's why. And anyway, so thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my learnings with the rest of you. And today I'm going to take you through the process of migrating data using Polybase from your on-prem to your cloud, newly spun up cloud environment. Now, first off, I think I need to share my screen. That's a good starting point normally.
I mean, we do enjoy watching you and your beard, but yeah, I think screen share is good.
Okay. Everyone can see my awesome little intro with my pretty little cartoon face. Can you see my screen?
I see the screen, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So what I want to focus on today is a year ago, we were tasked with moving what you call a PDW. It's a parallel data warehouse, or also known as an analytics platform, APS analytics platform solution. Now, that's an offering from Microsoft, which is a MPP SQL environment, which was very, very useful in our team, the way we use it, because it's the processing power of that thing was just next level. Compared to what we used to have, because we have servers with 48 cores, enterprise licenses, 768 gigs of memory, but that it's not a drop in the bucket compared to what the APS could do for us. And over the last 6 years, the hardware was aging, and we came to the crossroads where we needed to decide to either decommission it and move back to the way we used to work, buy a new appliance, or move to Azure. And that sounded, in my mind, that was a no-brainer. Let's move to Azure. That's where we reached our first little problem, because we've been accumulating over 110 terabytes of compressed data that we use on a daily and weekly basis. And now I need to figure a way out how to migrate that from our on-premise environment to into Azure. And got a little bit excited there. And the first things is we started looking at all the different cloud environments, Azure, AWS, Alibaba Cloud, all of that. And sorry to say that, but I'm probably one of the biggest Microsoft fanboys in South Africa. So the other two was just there to please management, and so I did look at it, but I don't think we have the right skills in the team to migrate to anything other than Azure. So we decided to move to Azure, and we got a very nice working relationship with Microsoft on there. So we sat weekly, daily sessions with trying to solve these problems of ours, because we can't just export the data. And initially we started using Azure Data Factory. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a fantastic tool. It has its place, but for me and my team, it meant we would need to change the way we work. And that's not really what we wanted. We want a quick and seamless transition from what we call the PDW to Synapse. So let's go into how we've achieved this. So first off, I just want to cover the basis of what is the different database offerings that Azure currently offers. So you'll see on all my slides, there's a little tiny URL link at the bottom right-hand corner that is linked to either the original article for this screen or more information that is extremely useful to go through. Now, and coming to SQL, now when I talk about SQL, we're talking about SQL Server. Microsoft Azure has a couple of different offerings for us. The first one is when you look at infrastructure as a service. That is a virtual machine with SQL installed as you would have had on in your current data center or in your current organization. No big difference there. You control everything down to the OS level. The next step down or up, depending on what you're looking for, is the SQL Managed Instance. Now, Managed Instance is essentially the entire SQL Server without the OS level access. It has its advantages and its disadvantages. So, for instance, just keep in mind that if you are thinking of going Managed Instance, the general purpose this is not as fast as you would expect it to be, as the storage is decoupled from the machine. Then you go down to Azure SQL Database, which is just a single database that you can have, and so you don't have to worry about the instance or the OS at all. So there's a lot of different options for you. There's also the new Arc offering. So when I say new, it's not super new, but I've not encountered Arc in my short-lived career here, where you basically link your on-premise environment directly into the Azure cloud as if it's one. So it's quite cool, but personally, I do not have a lot of experience there. So now why everyone's actually here is to understand, to see how we managed to move our data to Azure without using Azure Data Factory, and how we went about using Polybase. So the plan is, so number one is I have my data in my data center on my SQL server, and I need to get it to into Azure MySQL offering, be it my infrastructure as a service, my managed instance, Synapse, whatever that is. So first, you can create SSIS packages. That's quite slow. There's a lot of different options, but I needed a way to not automate it, but give me all the control and move data on demand when I need to move a specific data set. And I need to be able to move it on demand. So a couple of years ago, I think in SQL 2016, Microsoft released Polybase as part of the SQL offering, which is essentially a layer that can communicate with Hadoop as well. And with saying that, it's much more than just that. But to give you an idea, you can connect Polybase directly to Hortonworks or Cloudera, and you can query your Hadoop infrastructure right from within SQL Server. Why is that important? Because Azure Blob Storage is essentially HDFS. It's a Hadoop storage file system, or based on the Hadoop storage system. And you can connect your SQL Server to Azure Blob Storage as well. And then there's this magical little command, external tables, that is like a metadata wrapper around your SQL or around your data. So if you press push down your data through a external table, what will happen is the actual data will get stored in blob storage. And you can connect a different SQL server to that same data set and read it back up. Problem is Polybase is not yet at that level where it can infer the schema. So whatever you push down or store, it's not able to read understand the schema on the other side. So that's the reason why I set up a little link server just to push the schema. So that's like a 1 to 8 kilobyte connection sending it there. It's just a text string to say, I have my cars table with my 100 million records in, for instance. All my records get pushed down to blob storage, compressed. There's numerous different formats. And via my linked server, I just inform the server on the other side, this is the schema that you're going to look at. And do the reverse on this side as well. And all of this has been done with a simple little stored procedure that I have also that I can share with anyone if anybody's interested in it. But I'll take you through the process of how to get started setting this environment up completely. Okay, so first things first. So Polybase is it does not come standard with SQL Server Express Edition or Web Edition. You will need to install Standard or Enterprise. You have to either Standard, Enterprise, or Developer if you just want to play around with it a little bit. When you're going through the installation process, you'll see you need to ensure that you actually select the Polybase services for external data before moving on to the rest. Otherwise, it will not be installed. It is as simple as just restarting the installation. So you can just add it onto an existing SQL Server. One of the caveats or important factors to remember, you can only install Polybase for one instance on a server. So if you're running 3, 4, 5 different SQL Server instances, you can only install it for one instance. The other instances will need to leverage off of your main instance where Polybase resides. Then, so now we need to enable or start with setting up. So you'll see if you go to your configuration manager, you would notice that there's now 2 new services. It's your Polybase engine and the Polybase data movement service. You need to ensure that both of these services are running before we can move on to the next steps. Now, that is a very broad statement to say, because I've not managed to do one installation, and I've done maybe 100 plus SQL Server installations, and I've not managed to do one where these 2 would just start right off the gate, right off the bat. So there's about 3 things that's generally the issue that you can go and have a look at. You just need to ensure that TCP/IP is enabled in your configuration manager. I've found where I couldn't get it started because mix mode is not active, but that's more on local machines. I've not encountered that issue when on a domain, or the wrong Java runtime environment is installed. So it's quite an easy process. Just check in the logs. It's quite obvious normally what the problem is, but I just normally start off with TCP/IP, and that usually would resolve the issue. Okay, now it sounds like I'm just telling you about how bad it is, how finicky it is, and what you need to do. And as with technology, I'm not lying, even Excel is finicky if you start playing around with it a little bit. So now there's a next step. Once we've installed it, we've enabled it, we've ensured that all the installation caveats are sorted. Now we need to go into our server, into our configuration settings, and actually go and enable this. So you can do this with the advanced options under SP configure. You can enable Polybase. I also always allow Polybase export, and then very important, you have to set a dupe connectivity value. So if you go to the link, and you can also just Google this, there is 7 different settings here from 1 to 7. Each one of them allows for connectivity to different technology. So if you want to connect to Cloudera, Hortonworks, that 7 seems to be the most general option for me, and it always works because it does support Hortonworks, Cloudera, and blob storage in one protocol. And then remember to run the reconfigure and click that F5 on reconfigure a couple of times. Doesn't help you set it, but you're not running under those values. if it is and always just double check that it is running under these values. Okay, is there any questions so far? Or do you want me to take questions at the end?
That's entirely up to you. There are no questions so far. I just have one. I guess these configuration options are advanced options. So you have to do show advanced options and then reconfigure on the previous slide.
Actually not.
That's
it was under to my surprise as well yesterday when I was setting up my dev machine to test this all again.
I like. That gets me every time that, okay, so this is an advanced option. I don't know why they made it that way, but I like that it's not. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so now, if you have any inquiries on my awesome ASCII art, I just Google it. It's called generators. The green comments. But so to get started is now we have our on-prem SQL and we have our cloud SQL server. So everything that I'm going to show you now, we need to apply to both with slight little changes between the two. So to start off with, both databases on cloud and on-prem need to have a master encryption key by password. So you need to have a nice little super secret key, keep it safe for in case you need it one day, but do encrypt your database with a master encryption key before you can start with the rest of it. Now, the second part is you'll need to create a database scope credential. And this, if you want to set up the data sources, you'll need to have this in every database that you're planning to migrate. You can't just have it in master. And in fact, I don't think database scope credentials is allowed in master. And what you do, this is again, there is 3 different ways that you can configure a database scope credential when connecting to Blob. When coming from on-prem environment, I opt for my storage key. Don't worry, this is not my real storage key. It's quite redacted. So you create a database scope credential, give it a name with identity. I just normally use the same name, and then you give it your storage key. This would allow us, when we create our data sources, for your data source to authenticate with Azure and connect to how it should be. If we jump over to Azure, you'll see a slight difference. Now I'm in my Azure SQL DB, managed instance, Synapse, whatever floats your boat on this one. Is again, I need to create a super secret master key for my database. But on this side, if you're using SQL DB, you have to use a shared access signature. You can't use a storage access key. You have to get a SAS token. If you are using managed instance or Synapse or any of the other ones, I highly recommend using a managed service identity, MSI, that then pass through the permissions that the users have to that storage account as well. If you have multiple users, I prefer using MSI when I'm working with Synapse, shared access signature when I'm working with SQL DB, and then the storage access key when I'm working with on-prem environments. Okay, sorry. Okay. So now we need to create our external data sources. So this is now telling SQL how to actually get to my blob storage. And if I work on my on-premise environment, I can just simply do it by saying creating an external data source, give it a name, and you give it a type to say this is going to be a dupe and your location. So what I've done here is I've used the WASP's protocol, and you give it your container name, your storage account. Remember this /. This gets you every time. It allows you to create it without it, but that / is super important. Otherwise nothing works. And this is where you tell this data source it will need to authenticate using a credential that we've created earlier. Now, if you are using managed instance or Azure Synapse, dedicated pools, this is exactly what you would do on Azure Synapse and managed instance as well. You would use the WASP protocol with your credential, and you would create your external data source. But when you jump over to, if you're looking for Azure SQL DB, you can only connect via SQL Blob Storage, because this is where the tricky part comes in, as Azure SQL DB is the only offering of the SQL lineup in Azure that do not have Polybase. So there's a workaround that I'll cover on how to now read your data in to that. And it's quite a fun one. And then another, you'll see I mentioned on the left on my slide, the disclaimer. That's not the only disclaimer. One thing that could cause you also a lot of headaches is when you're creating a new storage account, you basically have 3 different options. You can go with a standard blob storage, you can go with premium storage, or you can go with Azure Data Lake. Azure Data Lake storage, if you have hierarchical namespaces enabled, is not supported from on-prem SQL. So when you're trying to push your data down or up from on-prem SQL, you cannot do that to a Azure Data Lake. And for both sides, I have not had success when selecting premium storage. If I select Azure Premium Blob, both sides refuse to. It says it's connecting, but I can't get any data back. So maybe I'm doing that wrong. If anyone succeeds on the premium storage, please reach out to me and tell me what I've missed. But I've struggled for weeks on that portion. Okay, then now I've created a credential. I've told SQL how and where to connect to my storage accounts. Now the next portion that SQL requires to understand is how to create the files, because it's not there's no magic file type. It needs to understand what file types to create. Now, again, if you're working with any of the technologies in Azure that does support Polybase, like I've mentioned, Synapse, Managed Instance, all of those nice ones, and infrastructure as a service, by far my favorite file format is Parquet. It is a super compressed, very flexible, it's non-human readable file format, but it is fast. It is so much faster than you would even anticipate it to be. When working with Parquet, generally this is the only time you can predict how many files SQL will create when it moves it to blob. So that's another thing that we'll cover a little bit later. But when you're creating a Parquet file from your on-prem environment, it will always just be one file. Where if you do it from Synapse, you'll get the amount of files with the number of distributions that you actually pay for. And to give you an idea, we can move a table that is on disk around 1 gig. It takes me just over a minute to move that using Parquet. That whole process, push it down to blob storage, replay the metadata and replay it on the other side. It is really an awesome file format to look into. But if you're using SQL DB or you have different applications for the data as well, so nice little backups, and you want to share your data with other teams that do not have, or other organizations that does not have the Parquet functionality to read or write in Parquet, you can also create different delimited text files. You can also specify compression. So when it's compressed, it does still compress it very well. It's just a delimited file, so with comma or pipe or whatever your delimiters are, and you give it your date formats. If you can avoid using delimited text, I would highly recommend avoiding it, because sometimes your data is not as clean as you think, and SQL has no problem writing dirty data to file. When you want to read it back on the other side, you might have a fun day or two trying to find that one record that had a comma in it in your 10 million record file or whatever. It's fun. Happened to me a couple of times now, so that's why I prefer Parquet. it's not just Bokeh. You can also write to awk and RC files as well as JSON files. You can read and write using Polybase, those file types as well. Now, let's go back to the magic, what we're planning to do. Now we told SQL how to connect to my blob, what file formats to create, and so now we actually need to start doing what we plan on doing. So first off, let's start by creating an external table. So what I normally do here, so I'm going to take you through the manual process, but I will, like I said earlier, I have a little stored procedure that I've written that does all of this for you in the background, which is quite nice because going and finding the metadata of all your tables and all that. So generally, I just go and right click on my table, get the schema, change create table to create external table, and then now what you do, you tell SQL, use this data source, go to this location, you'll see there's a folder structure inside of my blob store. Go to this location and use this file format, the text CSV. And this is how you create the external table. And then it is as simple as selecting all your data from your original table into your new external table. I just like to postfix, not suffix. I think it's called a suffix. My tables with either underscore migrate or sync or blob, just so that I know the difference between the external table and the physical table. From this point onwards, this table, the cars underscore migrate, can act as a table, as a normal table, with a few differences. You can continue to insert data, but you cannot delete data and you cannot update data into this external table. But you can aggregate it, you can create views on top of it, and reference it as per normal. What a lot of us, a lot of my process that I've built use this method to archive a lot of our data because blob storage is dirt cheap, and it's not terribly, it's not really that slow, or it's not intended for transactional systems. But if you have a table of data that you need to archive, because it's really, it might not need to keep the last 20 years of transactions in your transaction table, you can maybe just keep the last year, and the other 19 years can be stored safely on blob, and you can still query it as per normal. There's also a nice little feature in SQL where you, sorry, I'm getting a little sidetracked, but stretch tables, where you can stretch a table with this parameters, and it does this all in the background for you, depending on what parameters you have. So after my insert statement, you'll see I've specified text CSV, and my little 500 record table was split up into 4 text files on the blob storage here. And now, if you have using any of the technologies mentioned earlier where you can play with Polybase as well, that's not a problem at all. You can then just point it to that directory, tell it this is the file format in there, and this is the schema in there, and it will read it, no problem. One thing to keep in mind, and it's from lessons learned, when creating external tables, ensure that every table is in its own directory, because you can write 5 different tables into the same directory, but you can clearly see the naming convention that Polybase chooses for your data, and that is non-descriptive. And you will not know what belongs to what table, and when you're trying to read it back, you're telling it the metadata, I have all of these columns, and you read it like this. And if there's 4 different tables in this one folder, you will run into issues. You'll struggle to read back your data. Then if you then jump over to your newly created Azure environment, you go and create your external data table, which is now just a shell, and you just point it to this location. There is defaults, but you can set them as well. So you have to set the reject value and the reject type to say this is a value or percentage, and than the actual value or percentage. What that does is, if you made a mistake and you've loaded data into your folder which should not be there, you still have a workaround to get your data where you tell SQL you can still successfully return the results if 50% of, if you can read 50% of the data or 60% of the data. I've had to do 99% in the past on our previous environment because I forgot to move all the tables to its own directory. Nice and fun. And then it's as simple as reading from your migrated table and inserting into your physical table, because you'll need to harden your data once you're in Azure, because you don't want to keep it in blob. That was just a temporary solution. And then there's a link to my GitHub link presentation, and you can go through the stored procedures and you can have a look and send me any questions you have. I decided not to opt for a live demo because, you know, that never works on a Friday. It scares me to touch code on a Friday. This morning I just tried to get my presentation nicely branded, and I got a blue screen of death. So,
oh, nice. We actually had that on a SQL Friday when Gianluca Sartori was in the middle of, I think he was starting a demo, and then he was just gone. So I poked him on a DM on Twitter and asked, where did you go? And he said, well, my computer blue screen. I'll be back soon.
Yes, but I do. If you have the time, go and have a look at this link. I'll post it in the chat as well for everyone that is here. Okay, I'll post it afterwards. But that's to the GitHub repository where this presentation is, with all the code to do this in your own environment. Do this in a test environment first, please. I've never managed to break production, but I do not accept responsibility for broken production systems.
No, but I think real developers, professionals, they skip testing and just go straight for production, don't they? Yeah.
That is why I have my cowboy hat normally on my desk. If I get asked, how do you test? You just put it on and say, test what?
I was on a big project where we were changing data warehouse systems for, I was working for a tool manufacturer, like hand tools, and the project manager, he was a bit annoyed because we had some delays, and he had promised business that you will have a new warehouse system by this date. And he was given a date where we could close the warehouse to install the new system and change all the trucks and scanners and everything in there. And we were not going to meet that date, so he just looked at his beautiful Gantt schema and removed the last part, which was the testing, and said, we're going to go live on this date no matter what. So I think we had 4 or 5 days where we didn't ship one single package from the warehouse.
Wow. You see, that's how it's done. That's how it's done.
Yeah.
Just remove testing.
We have a question from Gabor. Can you create the partitions in the blob storage with Polybase from on-prem?
So that is a very, very cool thing. I've implemented that actually on one of my things, and I'm so sorry I did not include that into my presentation, and my drawing skills suck. But what is very, very nice is this, let me jump back, this folder schema. And especially if you have using one of the technologies that have Polybase. And this folder schema is really a game changer. So what I would go and do normally, and this is more manual partitioning, but it works very, very well. is, let's say, for instance, my car schema, I will go and I create this external table in my car schema. Then I will go create an identical schema with cars, let's say, migrate underscore, let's say, for instance, 2020. And I will create a folder called 2020. I will insert all my data into 2020. I'll do the same for 2021, 2022. So essentially now I have 3 folders. You can break that to another level, to months, to days, to hours, to minutes. You can have the hierarchy. I've not reached the limit, but I'm sure there should be a limit. Everything has a limit. But then you have a lot of awesome options. The one is, if you query your parent table, it will automatically read all of the children folders. So you would then have all 3 years worth of data that you would be reading from. But then you also have the option to only return 2020 data. You have the option to only return January 2020 data. And depending on your analysis, you can filter it down. You can speed up as much as you want to your analysis. And it's really, really nice. The one sort of not crappy thing, that's something that to keep in mind is if you delete an external table, that is it. You've just deleted the schema. The data and the blob store still remains. You have to go and manually clean that up. Polybase cannot clean it up for you. It will remain there.
Oh, okay. So you need to add some PowerShell to the pipeline where you run it.
I have 2 cheats for that. One is I've created because I love my data breaks. So I've created a Python script that goes and cleans up after myself. But the one that I do is I have a specific schema for my migrations, because there's long-term storage and there's migration. So migration, I created a storage rule to delete everything out of that blob container after 24 hours.
Okay.
No. So then I have empty external tables. That's easier to manage than go and clean up the blob stores for me. And I can just have a little job once a week, go and query all my external tables, and where the result is 0, that means the underlying data no longer exists.
Yeah. So it will not crash on you if you remove the actual files. Cool.
Yeah, it will not crash.
That's nice. Cool. Do we have any more questions from participants? Oh, Gabor, was that the answer you were looking for? Well, it was an answer. Yes, it was. Cool. Any more questions from anyone? Seems no. I think you mentioned you like Parquet file, and you're not the only one. They're almost magic. It's so cool, the performance you can get. Taking into consideration that you actually put the actual file is quite far away from where you query it, and it's pretty cool.
I have instances so this all depends on the data, underlying data, but I have had instances where I got up to 50 times compression on my data. Because the Parquet file is essentially just a column store type of file. So all the data, it's not exactly, but that's the best way to describe it. It's your data gets stored as a column store, and that's quite cool.
Yeah, and I think column store is pretty cool as well. It's fun to tell, hardcore old school DBAs that what we essentially did was to put Excel files in SQL Server and call them tables. And that makes people a bit worried sometimes. But the Vertipack engine isn't anything else than Excel, more or less.
I didn't think about it like that, but that is 100% true. It is.
Cool. I have a question. Can you enforce constraints on the external tables, or is that possible?
Again, me and this microphone. So I have never tried it myself. So I can't talk to that.
Then I will have to play myself. Marcus and Graham says you did a good job. I agree.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks, Graham. Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity. If anyone wants to reach out, my details is in that in this slideshow, and I will share it with on this session for everyone, for anyone that's interested in looking at it. The most values in this little URLs that goes to in-depth explanations of what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I'll put the link to the GitHub repo with the presentation as a comment on the YouTube video as well, so that it's easy to get to it. So.
Okay, awesome, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thanks for coming, JP.